Hello, welcome to my channel. Some of you may recognise St Gregory's Social Club in Bolton. This is where the classic TV series Phoenix Nights was filmed. I visited the area between the filmings of Series 2 and Max and Paddy, and I took these reference pictures, and now many years later I'm going to use these reference pictures to create my own model of the Phoenix Club. I'm going to do this in 1:76 scale because accessories for this are readily available. And with it also being a building, I want it small enough to fit in my house. So the next thing I did was draw up some plans. So here I've got the front side, the back side, left and right, and the corner section. I know this kit won't be perfect in scale, but I'm trying to get somewhere close without spending days and weeks analysing data and doing countless measurements. So I've cut out the basic shapes out of Fomex, and this is what the top-down view of the club will look like. So for the next step, I'm going to work on the centrepiece, and that is the main entrance into the building. I've already drawn out the basic design, I just need to cut it out. This part is essentially a porch, so to get the right depth, I've cut two of them out and I will glue them together. Now I'm just doing a little bit of tidying up after removing the doors, and those will be put back in place but set back a millimetre or so, and this will help to add a little bit of depth. Super glue works very well with this stuff, but plastic cement works even better, and it doesn't weld your fingers together. So I need to make sure I cover the whole surface and not leave any gaps. That way I can't risk the two parts separating. And now they're together, I can basically file it down until it's one piece, without any seam lines. There's quite a few other details to add, including the sign and the compartment for the roller shutters. For the finer details, I'm going to use this really thin plastic sheet, and I'm going to start off by cutting out a really thin strip. Ideally this strip could do with being thinner, but when cutting by hand you can only go so far. I cut this up into little strips so I can make the corrugated roofing. It's much easier to do it oversized like this and then cut it down afterwards, and that way the edges are perfectly flush. And this piece will go above the sign at the front of the building. I used a cotton bud to spread the glue out first, and you always have a few minutes to play about it before the glue sets, which is another bonus over super glue. It's starting to look the part now. Still got a few more details to add though, including the edging strips and the roof part. It's painstaking work, but just like building a real building, you do it one brick at a time. Then the roofing pieces go on. After this I add a couple more fine details, and that's the front section done. Bear in mind that this is quite tiny, so it will never look too great when you get up close with the camera. But now you know what the process is of making this little scale model, there's no point repeating those steps on camera. I built up this corner piece and now I'm gluing it into place. There are some pieces which need to be overlapped, so I'll add those later. Another corner at the back, add a little bit of a brace. This just adds further strength to the model. And now we've gone from 2-dimensional to 3-dimensional. The next corner piece has a sloping roof on it, and this matches the angle at the front of the building. So when I get round to adding the roof, it should join on perfectly. Next I add on the long side piece. This was fairly straightforward to make with just simple repeated details, with a fire escape at the end and a step leading off from that. So that's half of the exterior completed. Next I built and put into place the rear, and this was fairly basic to construct. It was mostly panels and a couple of fire doors. Then I did the remaining side, which joins onto the car park. And other than the front, this is probably the most recognisable side of the building, as this has the side entrance and it's the only side to have windows. And here it is again from the top view. It just needs a little more structure to hold it all together. So I added in some braces, and these will also help to support the roof. And the roof is a funny shape. It has a slope to one side, a peak to the other, and then a mishmash of angles to the rear. And I'm going to use 1mm thick styrene for the roof. And this stuff is a great modelling material because all you need to do is score it and then snap it, and that's much quicker than trying to cut all the way through. So now I just need to cut the roof into sections and stick it all down. In the show this is corrugated metal, and I'm going to create that effect later on, but for now I need a base to work from. And once again I'm doing all this by hand, I'm not using a computer or any accurate measurements, I'm figuring it out as I go along. And there's just this triangular cover to put on there, and this is done. And then I wipe off any of the excess cement. And now it's time to do a little bit of cleanup. And I file down some of the overlaps. And this allowed me to hide the crimes and make my measurements look like they were spot on. I also took the opportunity to fill in a few gaps with some modelling putty. And this once again shows that you don't have to be too accurate in the first place, because you can always fix most mistakes. I then cut out several strips of 0.5mm styrene, and this will be cut down to length to create the corrugated roofing. There's probably a better way of doing this, but I couldn't think of one at the time. So I applied the strips one by one. It's quite a time consuming process, but I suppose all progress is good progress, no matter how slow it is. Okay, so now the building's done, I can move on to the base. So I've dug out a new sheet of 5mm Foamex and traced around the building. So now I just need to sketch all the details on the ground. Thankfully there isn't too much detail to put in, but you can't exactly have a building just floating around. The car park is separated by a broken brick wall. And when it came to making the paving slabs, I just scored the lines in with the sculpting tool. And this is a fast and effective way of doing it. And for the texture of the car park, there's quite an easy solution for this. Ball up some tin foil and push it into the plastic, and the indent will make it look pitted, just like tarmac. Along the rear of the premises is a low brick wall with a wooden fence on top of it. I first score some panel lines into the fencing, and then use this metal brush to create some wood grain. I've added a groove which runs all the way down the centre of this wall, so that way when I glue in the wooden fence panel it has something to grip hold of. Cotton buds are good for cleaning up spillage. At the front of the building are some flower beds and some steps, and there's also a sign asking you to pull off into paradise. I'll show you those at the painting stage. And now it's time to attach the building to the base. You could always paint it first before attaching it, but some areas will still need filling in and you need to patch up some of the colours, so there's always a trade-off. Right, now it's prime time. It's nice to see everything in the same colour tone, as it makes it feel like a canvas that's ready to paint. Painting for a model this big is a bit cumbersome, especially trying to do it on camera, so it's easy just to show you a few highlights. It did take me quite a lot of time to paint this, as there's quite a lot of fine detail, and every time I went over the line I had to go back and clean it up. So it's safe to say that I put quite a few hours into this, and it's definitely a new experience to paint an entire building at this tiny scale. So I think it's better put on some music and get cracking. Once all the base colours were down, I added some washers. These were particularly useful for the paving slabs, as it helped to separate them. And I covered the car park in a dark brown wash, and then dabbed off the excess with a tissue. This created an uneven mottled effect to help resemble tarmac. And now I'm going to work on the flower beds with this ground texture. This is messy stuff to work with, but with a little bit of patience and a little bit of time, you will get it on eventually. And once it's dried, I paint it with a black brown, as this is a good soil colour. And after that I moved on to the weathering powders. And these I added throughout the building to represent sun and rain damage. And these are particularly good at giving that subtle colour variation. But as with all weathering powders, you have to follow it up by sealing it in. otherwise it will come off every time you handle the model. Right, it's time to add some greenery. First up, I'm going to put on some grass which is growing around the building. I'm using the end of this cotton stick to add some PVA glue and then sprinkle on a little bit of grass. This predominantly goes on at the edges of the building and in the cracks between the paving slabs. And after that I plant some flowers in the flower bed. I have the correct scale Volvo, similar to the one seen in the show, and I also have a pair of these industrial bins. But first they need assembling. These additional items will help to set the scene and inject a little bit of life into the diorama. I also added a little bit of weathering and painting to the bins, because for some reason people do tend to graffiti on them. And I nearly forgot Vine Potter's parking space, and this is going to test my freehand painting skills. And now it's time to add the signs. A friend of mine printed these out on stickers for me so they can go straight on. So I have the main sign at the front, I have a smaller sign at the side which you can't really see, plus I have the pull off into paradise sign for the front. With this scale, if you do get something quite square, it's really noticeable. Oh well. Still, it's looking good. It just needs putting into place. It just goes to show what a big difference it made by having these printed elements. Then I placed the bins at the back, and I chose not to glue them into place. And then last up, I added the Volvo. I will probably add some additional elements at a later date, such as Sammy the Snake or some of the characters from the show. But I've not had a lot of luck tracking down something similar that I can amend to fit, so I may have to make those elements from scratch. So anyway, that's my Phoenix Nights build. What do you think of it? I've tried to make it as accurate as possible, but at this scale I had to make some compromises, but hopefully they're not too noticeable. St. Gregory's Social Club looks quite different today. It's had a few amendments, so it's nice to have a visual representation of what it looked like during the show. Let me know in the comment below what your favourite Phoenix Nights quotes are. I'd like to hear them. Thank you for watching. Don't forget, if I can do it, so can you.